Well, hi everyone. Can you all hear me? Can somebody give me a thumbs up and let me know they can hear me? Thank you. It's just gone 10 o'clock and we want to make sure we get underway on time. So thanks for all logging in. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Wendy, the Member Services Coordinator here at ICI Australia. So welcome to today's ICI Insider. The ICI Insider series is designed to give you, as members of the civil industry, sharp updates on a variety of topics that impact our industry. And today I'm looking forward to today's presentation, which is focused on planning for risk, which is something we all have exposure to and need to manage. We're really fortunate today to be joined by David Chatwin, who brings more than 40 years experience to this topic. And David's going to be leading us through best practice and giving you some quick wins you can achieve in your organisation. So we're very focused on providing you a practical presentation. The formal part of David's presentation will be around 15 minutes and we've allocated time at the end for Q&A. So if you do have something you'd like to ask a question around, please put it in the chat and David will respond at the end. Our end time will be dictated by the number of questions we have. So please feel free to use that time. And then following the presentation, you'll get two very important items. Firstly, will be a copy of these slides that David talks to today, which includes the 7 strategies you can apply in taking advantage of risk. And David will obviously talk to those. And then secondly, a survey on today's event. Just a couple of questions will only take a minute to fill out, and we'd really love to get your feedback. And as a new addition, survey submissions will go into a draw and there'll be a lucky winner of our $100 ICI voucher. So with that, I'll hand you over to David to get things underway. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Wendy. Good morning, all. I hope we're all feeling sharp and on. We've got a lot to get through in a fairly short period of time. So if I put that on, hopefully we've got the screen. Beautiful. All right, so I'm going to give you today a quick run through 7 things you can do to help manage risk on your projects. Good. Sorry, my mouse is playing up. I'm not having a good day here today. We had a storm last night. My internet got nuked. Now my mouse is playing up. So first thing we need to do is know what our risk appetite is. So there's a few parts to risk that we need to look at. Risk capacity is how much your organisation can, I guess, absorb in terms of risk. If things go wrong, what's their ability to cope with it? The risk tolerance is how much risk-taking your organisation sees is acceptable. The risk required refers to generally the amount of risk required to deliver a project. Some projects are high risk, some are low risk. Sometimes clients want us to take more risk, sometimes less. So we need to know that risk required for what we're looking at delivering. And then finally, they all meet in the middle here is our risk appetite. And that's that's the organisation's ability or appetite for risk, but it is also your personal attitude to risk. And I think we should never lose sight of the fact that the two have got to coincide. If you are a very risk-averse person in a risk-accepting organisation or vice versa, it's maybe not going to work, and maybe you need to look at either changing the organisation's perceptions or changing your own. So that's the first strategy. Know your risk appetite, know your organisation's risk appetite. On to the second one. So we can't defeat our enemies if we don't know who they are. So the first thing the second strategy we've got is identifying the risks, and that's your first step to understanding them. If you don't know what they are, you will never understand them. And the second one is then once we understand our risks, we can identify mitigation strategies. And I'm going to circle back to this in a little while on another slide, but mitigation of risks is a key part of all risk management and project delivery. And there's a tendency these days, Douglas Adams said it many years ago in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, we demand rigidly defined areas of doubt and uncertainty. We're seeing this with clients, we're seeing this with organisations, that they want to know to a high degree what's uncertain on their projects. So knowing your risks. So we've got 3 ways of knowing our risks and dealing with them. The first thing is ignore them and hope for the best. And I call that the Wile E. Coyote solution. You don't know that you've run off the cliff till you're out in free space and wondering why you've got nothing under your feet. The second, understanding and planning for the risks. And I'll be honest, I am a Star Trek and a Star Wars nerd, so you're going to get references to that on my courses. But I call this the Catherine Janeway approach. As a starship captain, she knows what the risks are and she plans for them in everything she does. The final one, and this is one that I see all too often in our construction community, is contingency. And I will tell you that contingency is the Jar Jar Binks of the risk management world. If we're using a contingency allowance, then we don't understand our risks and we don't know what we're in for. Now, strategy 3, understanding your contract. This is one that unfortunately I see time and time again on construction projects where companies and the delivery people do not understand what the risks are, what their contract says, and then what the risks are that arise from that. We have a natural tendency as construction people to focus on our delivery risks of actually getting things built. No point getting them built if we're not going to get paid for them, or if they're going to be the wrong thing under the contract. So you need to understand what your contract says before you start delivering. Contract risks, they're the ones that are going to sneak up behind you and whack you over the scone. Or in this case, it's the shark swimming up behind the diver. So these are the ones we don't see coming because we don't pay enough attention to our contract and risks within it. Contract risks hide in plain sight. They are in the contract. They're written down. They're there. They're obvious. But all too often, we think they're hiding behind a tree. And then one thing that I've used a lot in all my contracts, my construction projects, is what I call my ready reckoner. When I say ready reckoner, sometimes it can be 20 pages long, but it's an easy way of looking at what's in your contract. So I'm going to give you some examples from a recent project I was involved in. It's still a current running project at the moment, but it's a good example. So I read through the contract and I go through and I pick out all the key clauses, the things that are going to come and bite us, or where we have to do things, where we have time constraints to deliver documents or whatever it may be. So rise and fall was a good one in this contract, in that the delivery people said, we're good. We've got rise and fall on this contract, so it's all sweetness and light. I read through the rise and fall clause and documented it, and then found the little things hiding in plain sight. Doesn't apply to more than 90% of the contract sum. So it's capped at 90% of the forward work after the first 12 months of the contract. Any falls will be deducted from future rises. Not that that's happening at the moment, but it's a risk. Price is firm for the first 12 months based on a preceding December CPI and affected by contractor performance reviews. Now, these were all things that the delivery team didn't appreciate because they hadn't reviewed the contract. And I'd put these little blue notes, notes that I just write to say how to interpret what's above them. Another one, precedence of documents. Now, this is one that will come back time and time again, that you believe that you've got a good case for presenting a variation or extension of time or whatever, and then you get knocked down on precedent of documents. So I'd prepare a little chart like this that steps you through where everything sits. And interestingly, on this one, the contractor's tender response is the lowest down the chain. So that even though you may have conditioned something in the tender response, unless it was specifically acknowledged in one of these earlier documents by rewriting that at the time of contract, your contractor's tender response meant nothing. So that's a huge risk. That's massive. The delivery team and the commercial team within this company did not appreciate the implications of that. So again, by reading the contract, going through, laying these things out, we can see them. And then service of notices. Again, another one that we fall over on, that we don't understand how we're supposed to serve notices. Interestingly, this is a Northern Territory contract. It's written on or based on general conditions which are 40 years old. 40-year-old general conditions. It contains things like notices are served by hand or prepaid post or sent by fax. I'll defy any of you to tell me that your company now has a fax machine, for example. Serving notices on the principal, hand-delivered, prepaid post, or fax. These are things, again, the team didn't understand. And if the client or the principal wanted to be difficult, they could go and whack you over the head because I never received that notice because you sent it by email, for example. So big risks. And this strategy, I think, is maybe one of the most important ones for me of understanding your contract. Dispute resolution. You always hope that we don't get to dispute resolution. Yeah, look, it's all too common these days. Again, the client, the company concerned, did not understand the dispute resolution process and the steps that had to be gone through to successfully lodge a notice of dispute, and then the time frame to resolve that dispute. The minimum time frame to resolve a dispute under these general conditions is 126 working days. That is about 6 months. The realistic time would be 9 to 12 months. So again, a huge risk if you're relying on problems being sorted out through a resolution process. 9 to 12 months, not going to work for your contract. Again, the delivery team did not understand that. So this sort of ready reckoner, I think, is essential on any project these days. Sorry, I keep looking at the time. We've got a fair bit to get through. Strategy 4, never accept risk without reward. This is something that I see again and again, that contractors in particular will take on risk without getting a suitable reward from the principal, purely because they're desperate to get the contract. You should never accept risk because you're desperate. But keep in mind that accepting risk without reward applies to that subcontractor relationship as well. Doesn't mean financial reward. It can be other things, programming changes, changes to contract conditions, timing of payments, payment for offsite materials, all sorts of things. Doesn't have to be a purely financial increase or a financial reward. One of the sneakiest ones I've seen done, or the best ones, I guess, was a recent contract or tender where the tender program was about 6 months too short and there were LDs in the contract. The successful tenderer, out of the ones that tendered, the successful tenderer nominated that they would accept the contract program as long as LDs were taken out of the contract. And the client accepted that. So they won the contract basically on the basis of saying, we'll accept your program, but we don't want LDs. Brilliant bit of, brilliant change to the contract conditions and a brilliant way to deal with the program and LD risk on that job. So look at rewards, don't accept risk without them. Oops, sorry, my mistake. Go back. And then the final one, know when to say no. Again, all too often I see companies that get involved in a tender process, they put a lot of time and effort and money into it, and they get to this stage where they're not willing to back away and go, you know what? The risks are just too much. We're not getting rewarded for them. No, we're going to pass now. We're going to withdraw our offer or whatever. We're not going to proceed any further. So that knowing when to say no is critical. Risk assessments, one of my favorite topics. So have a robust risk assessment. Again, it's scary the number of companies I see who go into a contract without a risk assessment and a robust one. The project team needs to be involved in the risk assessment because they're the ones that are going to be delivering it. They're the ones that need to understand how the risk's being determined. Embrace gate reviews. I think we all see gate reviews as being this really painful, unnecessary process. It's just a bit of paperwork that the company insists on. Gate review feedback can be critical in coming up with a really good, robust risk assessment. The effort you put in at this stage will be rewarded later on in the project. So while it's a lot of work, it's worth it. Key thing in this is that we must determine actions. So there's a risk mitigation strategy here. I've got no actions in this one in particular, but we should have the actions and the owner of those actions in there, and so we know what's got to be done, who's going to do it. ASNZ 4360 has got some good categorization of risks. It's a good starting point for the development of a good risk assessment. It's not the end point, but it's a good starting point. And don't forget your opportunities. Everyone tends to focus on risk, but there are opportunities on projects too. That's why I have a risk column and an opportunity column. These are the categories out of AS 4360. I'm not going to dwell on them, but as I said, it's a good starting point to think about how you're going to deliver things. Excuse me. Strategy 6, keeping the risk assessment up to date. Again, I see this all too often in contracts that and delivery plans, that the risk assessment is done at the time of tender, and then everyone forgets about it, goes away. Risk assessment sits languishing in the background and everyone forgets to look at it. It's a live document, needs to be updated. It will tell you what you need to do with the risks that have already been identified. But as you find new ones, as you deliver, you add them onto the risk management plan or the risk assessment, so that they're in one concise document that everyone can refer to and look at easily. Reviewing progress. Shouldn't have to say this, but we've got an action plan. We need to review that it's actually being delivered. The original team, so quite often we'll have a bid team and then we'll have a project delivery team. We should involve whoever we can out of that original team that have prepared the original risk plan on that review of the risk management plan. Should be part of the regular reporting cycle. So when on my projects, I always update and report the risk assessment, the risk management plan in the monthly project reporting cycle. It is a key part of that. And never be afraid to report when things are going wrong. Again, a key problem I see repeated again and again in companies is that people get nervous about reporting problems. I have some real horror stories about contracts that have gone substantially wrong because the people delivering them knew things were going wrong, but tried to hide it to a point where nothing could be done about it by the time management and the company realized there was a problem. No one will ever criticize you for reporting a problem early so that it can be dealt with. But if you don't report it, yes, you're leaving yourself open to be shot in the foot. And my final strategy, again, one that I think a lot of companies and people need to embrace, is see the value in accepting risk. I'm a very risk accepting person. I see the value in risk, that if you take risk on that the client doesn't want, you can make money out of it. They will pay you to take that risk away from them. Where there's muck, there's money. So too often we see risk as being entirely negative and needing to be avoided. And it's not. We can make money out of it. We can get the client, the principal, to pay us to take the risk. If we understand and manage our risks, we can improve margin, because successful mitigation of our risks is money in our pocket, and successful engagement of our risks and our opportunities will mobilize them to where we can make money. Where there's risks, there's opportunities. There's never just risks on a project. And opportunities for variations are usually limited. And we'd all have to agree with that it's hard to get a good money paying variation through on a contract these days. Yeah, we do variations. We don't make much money out of them, if we're being honest. So don't rely on variations to pick up your margin on a project, but risk is always going to be there. If we understand it and manage it, we can make money out of it. So I'll end with a quote from Mark Zuckerberg. Love him, hate him, very clever person. He understands that the only strategy that guaranteed to fail is not taking risks. And look where he is in life. So we can take our risks, we can deal with them, we can make money out of them. So I am through the talking part of my delivery in just on 20 minutes, which I think is what we're aiming for. And I'm hoping we've got some questions, Wendy.
Sorry, David, do you have another slide after this?
Oh, I do.
Thank
I
you.
was just seeing if we had any questions, but yes,
Yeah,
I'll go
no,
on to the
that's
next
okay.
one.
No worries.
Okay,
Thank you.
so while we deal with the questions, let's talk about well, Wendy will talk to the survey. I want to talk about this advanced risk planning course. As you might have gathered, I'm a little bit passionate about risk and managing risk. So I have a risk management course coming up, 20th of April, there's the date there. We will go through the topics I've just dealt with, but in a lot more detail. I will actually give you pro formas for developing a robust risk assessment and how to manage that risk assessment. There'll be some interactive exercises where I will get you to look at a project, and it's going to be one that went a long way wrong. It's one of my favorite case studies because it is such a poorly performing project. So we're going to go through that. We're going to look at what could have been done better to manage the risks, to understand them, to mitigate them. And so it'll be a good interactive session. You'll come away with some good documents. I'll also look at using Monte Carlo simulations in particular to understand the value of your risk on a project. So we'll look at those sorts of simulations. Quite extensive. It'll be a solid 4 hours, but I think it's a good 4 hours.
Well, thank you, David. So 2 links that I've popped in the chat for you. One is if you can't QR that survey there to complete it now, the link is in the chat, but I'll also be emailing it to you. We do really welcome your feedback from today's session, and you'll also go into that draw to win the $100 ICI voucher. The other link I've popped in the chat is to that next session that David was talking about. So if you'd like more information on that session or to book in, click on that link there. So with the questions, we do have a couple. Let me go to the chat here. Of course, you're welcome to come off mute and you can ask the question, but let me read a couple that we do have here. Someone says, thank you, ICI, for the information. It's been a good reminder. Question, you spoke about the risk of saying no compared to saying yes. How can an organisation benefit from a detailed risk assessment to get the correct answer or approach?
Okay, that's a very good question. So the detailed risk assessment is going to, at the end of the day, put a dollar value on the risks and opportunities on that project. So I guess it will then come down to the company risk appetite as to whether they say no that at a certain value or say yes, but you don't know what that value is unless you've got that robust risk assessment. So without flipping back through the slides, which I don't want to do, the risk assessment will give you and let me stress, it is your team's best assessment of the risk, the value of the risks on the project. I'm not going to say it will be perfect. No risk assessment ever is, but they're generally pretty good if you've got a few people involved on them. So with a good understanding and identification of all the risks and evaluation of those risks, and then the likelihood of those risks, you can come up with a dollar risk value. The company will then look at that and go, look, that's within a bounds that we're comfortable with, or it's outside the boundary we're comfortable with, and we're going to say no to this project. Does that answer the question?
Well, I'll read up the next one.
Thanks, David. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Maz. Another question. 7 good strategies. In your experience, which is the one that presents most opportunity or can have the biggest impact?
Oh, okay. Put me on the spot. I think personally, I think the risk assessment, preparing a robust risk assessment is the one that's going to give you the most benefit on a project. Absolutely. I look, just flipping through them quickly. Sorry, Wendy, I've taken your slide off. Risk appetite, that's easy. Knowing your risks, that's part of that risk assessment process. Understanding your contract, look, that's most probably the other one that's going to give you the best benefit. So between understanding your contract and doing that risk assessment. Close run race between the two. And it will come down to some extent to the nature of the contract itself. I've worked on $50 million projects that have had a 20-page general conditions of contract. So you'd have to look at that and go, you know, there's not going to be much hidden in that contract, but there's going to be risks around what's not in the contract. So your risk assessment is most probably the more important document there. I've worked on maybe higher value jobs, but you know, $100 million projects with AS 3000, which is a 240 pages-ish, I think, general conditions from memory. But 240 page general condition with 620 pages of amendments. Now let that sink in for a moment. The amendments to the contract were 3 times the length of the contract itself, or the general conditions, I should say, not the contract. So understanding your contract in that instance is most probably the more important strategy. And an example out of that specific project, there was a clause in there that I picked out. I was a delivery project manager. I wasn't involved on the bid. That the bid team and the company's entire legal team had not found, because they hadn't, I guess they hadn't gone through it in enough detail. There was a clause in there that said that the principal would withhold progress payments up to the value of the next best offer they received. So to put that into dollar terms, let's say you bid $100 million for the project and won it, and the next best offer they got was $120 million, just to pick a number. Difference between those two is 20 million. So the principal had the right to withhold the first $20 million in progress claims and hold it in the bank until the end of the project. And no one picked that up. What do you reckon that did to the project cash flow? So horses for courses, but I'd say risk assessment, knowing your contract and having that ready reckoner are both up there. I think they're equal first.
That's great, David. Does anybody else have any questions? Perhaps you want to come off mute. Feel free to type them in the chat box. Now's your chance while you have David here.
Limited time offer.
Otherwise, yeah, limited time offer, unless you, of course, book into advanced risk planning on the 20th of April. All right. Okay, so just to recap, I will be sending you a copy of these slides, some really invaluable information there. Please complete the survey either through the QR code or via the link. So the link is in the chat, but I will be emailing you. And of course, the link is in the chat and again will be in the email for information on advanced risk planning on the 20th of April. All right, well, thanks everybody for your attendance today. And thank you, David, for your knowledge and time, and we really appreciate it.
No worries, Wendy.
We'll see you all on the next